There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel, and here I am again with Mikiko, joining us from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And we are here to wrap up her very lovely reading project this year, where she read 6 of my favorite books. I'm just a little bit nervous, but I'm really excited to hear how it went. Hello, Mikiko.
Hi, Sean.
I told you going in that you should be completely honest about these books and that I wouldn't cry if you didn't like some of them. So I'm going to hold myself to that and
Okay.
hope this isn't going to be the last time we ever talk.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So is there anything else you'd like to say kind of as an introductory before we get into your thoughts on each of the books?
No, just that I was inspired to see if our reading tastes truly overlap as much as I thought that they had. So it was good.
Well, we'll
Good
have some wrap-up thoughts
project.
on that.
Yeah.
Great. Well, please, I'm the suspense is killing me here, Mikiko.
Sorry. So I'll talk about them in order that I read them. The first book that I read was Happening by Annie Ernaux. This was originally written in French and is translated by, I believe it's Tanya Leslie. I always get 2 first names mixed up when I have to remember those. And then, of course, was published in English. At least the publication that I had said it was first published in 2001 in English. So I started reading that, and to be quite honest, I'll right from the outset, I'll admit that I'm not the biggest fan of memoirs and autobiographies, collections of personal essays, but I was really interested in reading about Ernaux's experience with abortion, a topic that I find quite interesting because, well, A, it's contentious, isn't it? But also, I don't know enough about women who have gone through experiences of abortion, so I thought this would be an interesting kind of toe in, so to speak. So I read that, and it is a series of kind of journal entries about, her finding out she's pregnant, her thinking about the pregnancy, thinking about, whether to contact the father, what to do, and it's her ruminations throughout this entire pregnancy up until she aborts. I thought it was interesting in the sense that I didn't find that she was very descriptive in her emotions throughout the process, and it was written quite matter-of-factly.
Yes,
which there's
absolutely.
nothing wrong about. Yeah. And I think what I was expecting based on the summaries I had read was a bit more of a kind of emotionally impactful narrative. And so because of that, I think I was just jolted a bit. But I guess maybe the best way to write about something that is quite, it would have been a difficult decision, I think. I don't think it's an easy decision for any person. But maybe the way to write about it was matter-of-factly. But I just didn't feel like I connected with her because of that kind of lack of emotional, any kind of emotional feelings and sentiments throughout. And in fact, I felt like she was at times a bit more cold about it. I mean, when she goes to see, I believe it's the gynecologist that she sees when she's first pregnant, her kind of reaction is, I'm pregnant. I couldn't think of anything more awful. And I thought, okay, so there's some kind of insight. So I didn't feel like what I had read about in the blurb was accurate to what I read, although I still found what I read quite compelling. So I think because of those expectations, and because I'm not really a fan of this type of nonfiction, it just wasn't a 5-star for me. However, I still think it was a really great read. And I think that if people are interested in reading more about abortion from a perspective of somebody who has gone through the actual process, I think it's quite good. And I think it accurately, or rather, I think her journal is a great way to access her own thoughts, because she's in her 20s, right? She's 23 when she's writing this journal. And I think it's very indicative of her age. She takes a long time to make a decision. And even after she's made the decision, it's very clear that she doesn't know what to do, how to go about doing it. And I think that, it shows that she's a young person who's just got no support, especially in a country where in France, abortion was illegal at the time. So, she's just a bit lost. And I thought that was obviously very clear from her journal entries. So I think that if you're looking for this kind of novel or this kind of story, it's a great piece of nonfiction. But for me, I just felt like, I'm not 100% sure.
So let this be a lesson to you, Mikiko. Don't read the synopsis on the back.
Yeah, don't read that. Just don't read it. It's lies. It's marketing material.
It's lies. It's propaganda. It should be banned by law. Anything on the back or inside flap.
And I should know. It's promotional material for the book. So I mean, propaganda, that was my fault.
And it's often not accurate.
No. So I'll remember that. But I still thought it was good.
This is the only book I've read. I saw the first and the only one so far. Oh, actually, no, I'm reading her right now. I'm just getting a bare start on her most well-known book, the one that has come fairly recently. Just a second here.
Right.
The years, I think, is her most well-regarded work.
Yeah,
it's quite a bit more complex and longer.
Yeah.
But this was the first one, and yes, she writes in a very spare, dispassionate style, and it did confuse me at first. But again, it's a while since I've read it, about a year maybe. I think there was something in the things that were not said that had the kind of the impact, and also the resonance between the passages that were interspersed with her journal entries that were from the perspective of a quite elderly woman looking back on that and remembering. And I found those passages really quite compelling too. But that's basically my memory. So I'm glad that you thought it was worth a read.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's enough conversation about it. I think because it is such a contentious issue for a lot of people. And I understand that. I'm not diminishing that. I just mean, for me, hearing about it firsthand from those diary entries. And like you said, seeing Ernaux look back on it and look back on those experiences and those decisions is quite compelling, because, it's interesting to reread your own work and understand, what you were feeling in those moments. So I thought that was quite brilliant. So, yeah. So book 2 that I read was Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread. So I don't want to butcher this author's name, okay? So just give me a second here, because I know that I have. So it's Francesca Ekwuyasi. That's it, Ekwuyasi. So published in 2020, and of course, long listed for quite a few things here. It looks like the 2020 Scotia Bank Giller Prize, Governor General's Literary Award, Canada Reads nominee, although that was, I believe, in 2021, but all of these, different prizes. So I tried not to think about that too much as I read it, because, I didn't want these unrealistic expectations to form. And so we have the story of a woman and her 2 twin daughters, Kambaranachi, and then Thien and Cain, and their story basically is focusing on one quite traumatic event, which all 3 women know about, and how their lives have progressed since that event. It's not a chronologically linear timeline. You get flashbacks. We hear all about Kambaranachi's life and her relationship with her husband and the twins' father. And I thought it was a really nice look at not only the relationship between a mother and her daughters, but also sisters, and how trauma can have a ripple effect on different people in the family, even without them knowing, right? And I loved that each section was based on each of those food items: butter, honey, pork, and bread, which I kind of wish featured a bit more in the text, to be honest. I love food, so I was kind of hoping it would be a bit more like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel, where the food that features at the beginning of the chapter makes quite an impact on the storyline for each of those segments. But that's okay. It was still really interesting to read. Made me very hungry. Felt myself salivating at times. So it did its work anyway. And what I really liked was reading about the relationships among the three women. But what I realized is, personally, I think I really struggle with mother-daughter relationships in fiction and also sister relationships. And I think that's because in this story, Cain is quite close because they're in Nigeria, right? Cain and I think it's Cain. So they're both in Nigeria, whereas Thien is moving around Canada. So they are separated, and you can see that also mimics the way that their relationships work. And I think that I just struggled with it because I had a great relationship with my mom. So, when I read about fractured relationships with mothers and daughters, I feel really sad about that. And I felt like that in when I read Elena Knows, and also It Would Be Night in Caracas. Just mother-daughter relationships that aren't good, I really struggle with, and I kind of wish they were stronger and better. And then the sister relationships, I find those hard to read about because my sister and I grew up not really on the same footing. We just kind of struggled and eventually got there. Everything's all good, but I find it really hard to read about sister relationships that are quite fraught and tumultuous because, I just feel sad. So that was my only kind of critique, but it's a completely personal critique. It had nothing to do with the writing, had nothing to do with the story itself. I mean, I thought Thyen's arc was fantastic. I loved reading about her and her development and how she is constantly thinking about what it is that has fractured her relationship with her sister, because she doesn't understand. It's almost as if she's blocked this memory. She's suppressed it to such a degree that every time she's reached out to her sister completely ignores her. And she just can't understand why. And it takes the whole novel for her to figure it out and then repair both her relationship with her mother and then her relationship with her twin sister. And it's so well done. Like, I think that sat with me for days after I read that. So that was a win for me. I think the only thing I wish a little bit was that we just got a little bit less of Cain story and a little bit more of even Cain Day's story, because I kind of felt like she was the missing piece that we didn't hear as much about. So that was my only criticism. And then, of course, that, the subject matter was a bit tough.
Well, that's really interesting. So I want to quip, and this is a comment not upon your reading sensitivities as much as it is a comment on modern contemporary fiction. If you don't like reading books where there's conflict with the mother, I'm not sure which novels are left for you to read. They're all read. There's not very many. There's not much fiction that portrays close parent-child relationships. I can't think of any.
I know.
There must be some.
I know.
But that's interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I think that this actually touches on quite a few of the books that I chose to read of yours. So I do think it's a narrative thread that I have to be more cognizant of as I pick up books. But I don't. Like, I say that, but even picking them up and reading them, I still thought that they were very enjoyable to read. The reading experience was great. Again, I don't regret picking up any of the books so far. So it was still a good experience.
One of the things that I loved about Tanya, and I just loved her, I think she was my favorite character in any book I read the year I read that book, was her sexuality. And I don't just mean that she was a lesbian, but just the way that her sexuality just poured out of her, and she just couldn't help without trying to, without even being conscious of it, just electrifying the air around her as she moved through the world. And I just found that so lovely to read. I just adored her. And so you thought maybe Cain took up too much space in the novel. So did you not get along with, because she was Obanji, and so she had this kind of spiritual spirits that were kind of controlling her and so on.
Yeah.
And did that part not interest you as much, or was it weird for you, or how did you respond to that part?
That didn't bother me at all. I thought that was really brilliant. I don't think it's that I didn't enjoy that. I just think that I wanted a bit more of the twins, and maybe what I was expecting was a bit more of Cain Day's kind of life after that event. I mean, or that traumatic event. I mean, you do get some, you do. I just think she just doesn't get as much airtime as the other two characters, or rather, I guess, page time. And that's fine, because I think we're meant to look at the development of both Camberanacci and Taye over the years. So I think that's fine, but I just kind of wished we'd gotten a bit more of her. And if there's one narrative to cut a bit shorter in order to make that room without making the book longer, I guess is all I mean, then I would say I would have preferred just a little bit less of Camberanacci. But I mean, if Ekwuyasi had just added more to the book, I would have been okay with that as well. Like, I found it something that was just like, it was very easy to digest. Like, I could have kept listening to that story, go on, even after there's some resolution. I could have still kept listening. I thought that in that sense, for a debut novel, I was quite impressed with that, and I had to remind myself that, this is a debut novel. She's done a great job, considering this is the first thing she's put out into the big bad world, like that's pretty darn tootin' good. Book 3. Well, I read Indelicacy by Amina Cain.
Aha.
Yes.
I
Okay.
think I might know how you thought about that, but I can't remember if I know or not.
Okay. Well, I mean, so at the time I was interested in reading this. Nobody had really talked about it. And then I saw you pick it up and you were talking about it. And I was like, oh, isn't that the book that I was interested in? But yours was the cover with the woman sitting in the frame of the cover, and the one I had seen was that kind of hideous one. And I mean, you can put it up on if you want to. It's that blue with pink pattern. Anyway, so I didn't make the correlation, was lost on me. So anyway, when you said that you really enjoyed it, I was like, okay, well, I've got to read it then. Sean loves it, Again, another short story, or shorter novel, and I don't know what I was expecting. This is one I actually went into knowing very little, just what I'd heard you talk about on your channel. And yeah, I just found the story really interesting. So we have the two female characters. The story opens with Vittoria and Antoinette. They're cleaners at the museum. Vittoria is quite independent, has what she wants, has what she needs, devotes herself to being very financially aware of her situation, and saves for things if she wants things that are more expensive, but doesn't really live outside her means, which was just, I don't know, I thought that was the smartest kind of character in terms of her financial life that I've read in a long time. But I really liked her relationship with Antoinette. So I kind of hoped for a bit of a lesbian love relationship, and that didn't happen, because I didn't know anything about it. I kind of assumed that it was this kind of, I don't know what I assumed, but that's kind of where I was hoping it would go. And then Vittoria gets married and the whole story just unraveled before my eyes, and I was heartbroken, and I was like, what am I reading? What's going on here? So I realized quickly that that's not what the story was about. I had to kind of pause, reset, and go, okay, what's the story actually about? And listen to the rest of it and went, okay, so maybe this is a story about this woman's kind of quiet passion for writing. Maybe it's this woman's quest for independence and how she really gets that. And is it a kind of be careful what you wish for, because, she gets married, she moves to the country, she still gets to write, but, the story kind of flips on its head, where at the beginning of the story, she's a cleaner. By the end of the story, she has a cleaner. Her circumstances changed. How does that impact her? How does that impact her relationships? Where the heck did Antoinette go? Like, what's happening? And yeah, it was it was a really interesting story. And once I got over that heartbreak, I actually listened to it again. So I really liked that. And so even though it wasn't a queer love story, which I had been hoping for, I still finished it and felt like, wow, that was really good. I really like Victoria's story, even if it doesn't include Antoinette at the end. So
Listening to you talk, I'm thinking about expectations going into a book. And at first I was going to make one of my ridiculous blanket statements that once I think about it for a couple of days, I realized was way over the top, that I never have expectations going into a book. But that's not true. But I don't have expectations. I think the only expectations I have going into a book is like, because I never read the back, and I try not to pay too much attention to what the reviews say. And if I've heard too many reviews, then I'm going to wait at least 2 years before I pick it up, and by which time I will have forgotten most of what I've heard.
Smart. That's very smart.
But the expectations that I can develop are, if I've read other books by the same author, then I have a certain expectation that I'm going to get something akin to what I've read before.
Okay.
And if I don't find that, I can have a negative reaction. And I've had that with a few of my, one of my very most favorite writers is Barbara Pym. And there's a few of her books that are not like the others, and I didn't like them very much because my expectations were not met. So I have that kind of expectation.
Fair. Oh.
But other than that, I don't think when I approach a book, it's just like a virginal experience for me.
Well, that's
You heard it here first.
I'm sure there are so many things to say. I'll just keep my mouth shut and go back to the book. But I think you're right. And I think because I hadn't read anything, I didn't know what I was getting into. And I think that actually lent itself kind of nicely to my own reading experience, because I didn't know when this, when I thought about the setting and the environment, I was like, at first I didn't even know where or when the story took place. It's very nondescript, and I loved that. So I thought, okay, so there's some ambiguity here. And then when the relationship when a lack of a romantic relationship happened between Victoria and Antoinette, I thought, okay, so maybe that's meant to be ambiguous as well. So I just I went with the flow. But I mean, those were definitely self-imposed expectations just based on what I was reading, and maybe just a bit of a hope. And I think that's just because I really liked the relationship that the two women developed. And I like that in stories. I like when there are positive representations of female friendship. I think because, especially in today's society, women are pitted against each other as, I don't know, competition of some sort. So I think, it was a great friendship, but then I just hoped for something more, for whatever reason.
Indelicacy, which is the best title ever, because there's no such word, right? Delicacy.
That's
but
right.
Indelicacy is just a genius title.
Yeah.
It was my top read of last year, and I think part of the reason it impacted me so deeply is that I really identified with the main character, Victoria. And she's very, in a way, timid, or she certainly doesn't exude self-confidence.
No.
But when she gets tapped into something, like she just kind of fell into the paintings as she was cleaning the art gallery in the middle of the night. And then she got into the habit and coaxed that habit into a long-standing habit of writing when she got home, writing in her journal about the art. And that developed her aspirations to be a writer. And she never, in the course of this, is not a spoiler, there's not enough plot in this novel to spoil it, but she doesn't, in the life of the novel, she doesn't become a published writer.
No.
But we see her kind of coaxing herself along without a whole lot of self-confidence.
Yeah.
And I just really identified with that and loved her so deeply in that very quiet journey.
Yeah, and that's I think a great way to describe that. It seemed like a quiet passion. Her writing is not, it's not exuberant. It's not something that's all consuming, but it's something she enjoys. Well, I think she says it's the thing she enjoys doing best, so she must love it, or something along those lines. And I thought that, I think that makes sense. It may not be super like, the thing that you just talk about for hours and hours and hours, but it's what you feel most compelled to do. And when you feel that pull, should you ignore it? And she doesn't. And I like that as well, that she dedicates herself to it, even though she doesn't even consider herself a writer. She doesn't consider herself in the process of writing something that's going to be published or be released to an audience. But it's something that she feels the need to do. And I wonder as well, because I'm not a writer, but I do wonder if that's the kind of need that a writer feels. You feel like you have to write it. You have to write it. It has to get out of you and put onto onto paper. Otherwise, you just, maybe something happens in that process, or maybe there's an incompleteness as a writer that you feel.
And she doesn't have that typical writer personality, if you think about it, which is more typical of male writers than female. But even female writers, that just have a self-confidence. And can you imagine her as a published novelist? It's kind of like, what's that one that from Britain's Got Talent, the one that she was just a drab, middle-aged woman, kind of paunchy, right?
Boyle. And then she had the
Susan Boyle. Kind of like
yeah.
that.
Yeah. I can see that. That makes sense. Yep. Yeah.
Now there's not in all ways, but in some ways. And then one of my favorite moments in the novel, we won't describe it in detail, but where she erupts in anger at a literary reading.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
I love that so much. So that you couldn't pigeonhole her. She'd had,
that's right.
There's so many different aspects to her personality, and I just loved her.
I did too. I really did too. That's one that I thought, okay, I'm going to reread this. I think originally I thought, did I really love it? But I read it back to back. So I read it twice. And then I thought about it, and I still think about it, and I still think I want to reread that. So that was a definite win, Sean. That was definitely 5 stars.
I'm so pleased.
Yeah. So was the next one, and that was the Peacock by Isabel Bogdan, and that was translated from the German into English by Rutherford. And I loved that book. Yeah. I don't know how I got my hands on that. I think you and I were chatting back and forth a bit about that, because
then you found it somehow.
I did. Book Depository was the only place, which was fine. And, I know they were owned by Amazon. I know they don't exist anymore. But when I finally got it, I thought, okay, I'm sure it's going to be worth it. And it took me, oh gosh, I really struggled to get into it. And I think that's because my personal life wasn't super great at that time. Things were just busy and a bit all over the place. And I wasn't able to give it enough time when I first started it. So I think I started it about 5 times, and I would just stop. I couldn't. And then finally I said to myself, listen, you've committed to reading this, give it 25 pages. And if you don't enjoy it, then okay, then that's your answer. So I sat down one night, got all cozy up, and had some tea and some snacks, and I got 25 pages in, and I didn't stop. I think I read on quite a while, and just loved it. I really loved it. This was another book, I had been tempted to read it because you had talked about one particularly kind of what I had thought at the time was a risque scene, but of course you corrected me, and then I still went into it thinking about that, but actually it was, I don't know, it was just such a funny and entertaining read. You know what I mean? You have a great cast of characters. You get great insight into each character. It's a team building workshop at this dilapidated castle that's converted to this kind of, I don't know, Airbnb style kind of place. And everybody, I think, is it the cook or the maid is in a cast at some point, and just, a rogue peacock doing whatever to
unspeakable things.
Oh, it's so great. And I just read it, and again, I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I just thought it was really well done. And I mean, I think you have to credit the translation as well, because that was flawless. There was never a moment that I stopped and thought, is this translated? Not one moment. And I think Rutherford definitely captured the comedy of that. And I hope that's in the original. I hope that that's not something that I'm talking about that was never in the German.
Oh,
The
I
German
imagine it
version.
would be impossible to write this story without humor, because
Right?
otherwise it just
Okay,
wouldn't work.
okay. And yeah, and again, I think I'm pretty sure I read this twice. I really loved it. It's another shorter work of fiction, 200 and something pages, less than 210. And I thought it was so well done, considering how much insight you get into all of the different characters who are both at or working rather at this castle, and then all of the people who come up from this corporation who are there for this team building retreat. I thought it was quite great considering it's so short. I don't feel like and you can chime in here if you felt this way, but I didn't feel like any of the characters didn't have enough time to,
No, not at all.
from
Not at all.
yeah, so well done in that
And it was just
sense.
such a weird thing that a German novelist would write a book set in
I
Scotland.
know, it's very odd.
And yet it didn't feel like it was a foreigner writing about a place she didn't know. So she obviously knew
No,
Scotland or did her
yeah,
research, because
yeah,
that part worked.
yeah,
And that it was such a, in a way, crazy premise, but it just
yeah.
worked.
It really
So that
worked.
I did get emotionally involved to a certain degree too. I just cared about the characters and was giggling or chortling all the way through it.
Yeah, me too.
And so what did you make of the hot tub scene?
I
Was it
thought it
just
was the tension. I think that's what it was. I couldn't believe how much tension I could feel, that sexual tension while reading a book. And to be honest, I think that's partially because I don't enjoy romance novels, so I don't tend to read them. And I think that if I ever get that in fiction, it's very brief, or it's very skimmed over, right? It happens, it's done, or you hear about it, but it's never intense. And I think the tension in that hot tub was just so well done. I was just sitting there going, what's going on
it was
here?
it
When
was
is
a
this going
really
to happen?
hot tub
Oh,
scene.
I was sweating.
You and
It
me
was
both,
great.
girlfriend.
It was so good. I would happily read that again as well.
Every year at my besties and worsties at the end of the year,
It's
my annual wrap up of the year, I have an award for the most erotic scene, and that was the winner
oh
last year.
yeah,
Definitely.
definitely.
I don't find graphically sexual scenes all that erotic usually. So I remember, I think the year before or a few years before, I gave the award to a novel from the 1930s or 40s where these
Mm.
teenagers, or maybe they were 20 years old, and they were going for a drive, and they decided to switch seats without getting out of the car. And so they had to
Ooh.
get over top of one another. And that was described in one or two sentences. And that was the most erotic thing I read, because there was
Oh,
nothing graphic about it, but you
interesting.
just couldn't help
You can,
but put yourself in the middle of that at the age of
yeah.
20 and what that would be like to
Like,
get over top or underneath the other person. And it's like, oh, that's so hot. And I had one subscriber, she rushed out and bought it, and she said,
oh
well, the
gosh.
sentence you read to us was the only thing about it. There was nothing more. I was so disappointed. Well,
Oh no.
you get your jollies one way and I get mine the other, I guess.
Also, it's the imagination. I think if you're writing,
Absolutely.
so if that was published in the early 20th century, you would be driving, and you would be driving a stick shift. So, I mean, there
So
are
you'd
lots
have
of
all
different
kinds of
things
things to
that
bump up against.
I'm just saying the
Oh God, we're gonna have
imagination
to
is
put
where
an
that goes.
X-rated
Okay,
label on
let's
this.
stop.
This
That's we'll stop
is a
there then.
bonding experience,
There you go,
Mikiko. I
Sean.
didn't realize you were so hentai.
A little bit, but don't tell anybody.
I won't.
Thank
Your
goodness my
secret is safe.
family doesn't watch
Your
videos like
secret is
that.
safe with us.
Oh, good. But I thought, yeah, I thought the Peacock was brilliant. And yeah, I'm so happy that I struggled to get it and had to buy it, because I would have purchased it either way. But yeah, great one. And actually, it's interesting because the next book I went to after, I had to take a bit of a break because I moved, of course, and it was just quite busy. And anyway, life, as if life should be interrupting my reading, but it did. And the second last book I ended up reading was Woman Running in the Mountains by Yūko Tsushima. It was translated from the Japanese by Geraldine Harcourt and was originally published in 1980s. I believe the English translation didn't come out until 91, so we waited a long time to get that. I thought it was going to be pretty tough to get, but actually it was quite easy for me to get this book.
Yeah, it just came out from NYRB Books about a year ago.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, this is fantastic. This is perfect. I've never read anything by Yūko Tsushima, so I was really excited. I did read the introduction, so I did have an idea of what was going to happen in the text prior to reading it, which was actually pretty good because I'm pretty sure that in that introduction they talk about the statistics of single women having children or birth rates outside of marriage, which I think at the time it's the 70s, right? This book takes place in the 70s and in Japan, in Tokyo, and percentage was 1%, so quite low. So I thought it was quite an interesting story considering that fact. So we have this young woman, she's in her 20s. She becomes pregnant, isn't in a relationship with the man that she gets pregnant by, decides to keep the baby, and is living at home with her parents and her brother. Her brother's clearly the favorite of the two of them. And, you have an alcoholic abusive father, and a mother who is obviously quite upset at what's going on with her daughter's decision, who's constantly trying to convince her to get an abortion or, just go away and deal with this and stop bringing shame on the family kind of thing. And this young woman has so much conviction, and it's interesting because I couldn't stop thinking about Ernaux's happening while I was reading this, right? They actually read pair together very nicely because Takiko, the protagonist in Woman Running in the Mountains, is very, like, her conviction about having this baby is so strong that she never wavers. And I think that was really interesting. And actually, she also doesn't really talk about her emotions about her pregnancy or any kind of love or like parental love or maternal love forming for this unborn baby. She doesn't seem to really have that connection. And yet she prepares very well ahead of time for, daycare services, the hospital stay, her hospital visits, all of the things that the baby will need. She's very conscientious of her financial situation and how she's going to allocate what she has financially to this child. And it's really beautiful. And as I've said, I'm not a huge, mother-child relationship kind of story reader, but I thought her dedication to her unborn child was just really, really heartwarming and really just incredible, because even after he's born, she doesn't really bond the way that I think a lot of people would expect her to. She does bond with the baby, but she doesn't describe the bond. She doesn't talk about any kind of emotional bond. It does feel like it's a very, okay, I'm obligated to take care of this baby, but yet you never feel that that's how she actually feels. It's just a natural sense of, okay, this is my child. I have to take care of it. There's clearly love, but it's never overdone. It's never explicit. And I just thought it was very, very, I don't know. I just thought it was really beautiful.
I love this book so much. It's the third by Yūko Tsushima that I've read, and I've loved each one more than the last one. Her translator recently had been Geraldine Harcourt. And Geraldine Harcourt died about 3 years ago, quite young.
Gosh.
So I don't know if there's any more Geraldine Harcourt translations to come out yet, but I know that we've only seen the tip of the iceberg of Yūko Tsushima's output that has been translated.
Yeah, I thought it was quite good. Now, I know a lot of people don't love Japanese translated work because it can be quite matter of fact. It can be quite, statement-like in terms of its prose. But I still thought that Harcourt was able to capture Takiko's love for her son. I just thought it was beautiful.
It would be so interesting to compare it to other representations of motherhood, especially young motherhood in Japanese literature, and in particular by other Japanese female writers, because I can't think of anything to compare it to that I've read. But you have just pointed towards this matter of factness of the Japanese fiction at
Hmm.
least how it comes across in English. So I think
Yes.
there's something cultural there as well.
Yes. Yes. Well, I
But
mean,
it would be a comparison would be so interesting, wouldn't it?
yeah. I wonder if you could, I mean, I know that the child in, is it the house cleaner and the professor? The housekeeper and the professor. Is that the one I'm
Right?
thinking of? I
Yeah,
think the
different.
son, different author. It is Yūko Ogawa. And it would be interesting to see. Now her son is a little bit older, but
Yeah,
it might be interesting to see how she raises her son.
Yūko Tsushima. I don't know how autobiographical these books are, but the protagonists of all three novels that I've read. The first one I read, I don't think these are in publication or even translation publication order, but the first one I
Mhm.
read was Territory of Light. And
Yes.
then the next I read Child of Fortune. And the protagonists in both of those are also single mothers.
And then the last one I read, which was the biggest book of them all, was Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine
Ah,
Thien. Yes, published by Knopf in 2016. Again, another one, another, big hitter for Canadian literature. So what? It won the 2016 Scotiabank Giller Prize and the Governor's General Award for Literature, and was both shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize and the Women's Prize for Fiction. So, like, very very big in the literary world. And it was interesting that I picked this up when I did, because I believe that Kim, Heidi, and Joe Smith were buddy reading it. So
and
I had
you
been
weren't
doing,
in on that buddy read.
they didn't even know what I was doing. So it's no big deal. um, and I think my pace was very slow anyway. And it was one of it was, I was reading it at a time where work was getting a bit busy, and I was just kind of getting settled into some things in our new apartment, and so whatever, it just took me a little while to get into it. And I was about 50 pages in. I had set it aside, and I just had to reread those 50 pages when I went back to it. So I reread it and again gave myself some more time with it. And then it just didn't stop. And I listened to this and read the book at the same time. My partner just happened to be walking by a little free library and saw it. So we went and picked it up. So I had the big, big, big book and I had audio, and I listened and read it. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. So I think I did end up
Can't
hearing a lot
believe
of,
it. I can't
I
believe
know.
it. Almost
So I
everybody who I've ever
know,
recommended this book to has not liked it at
not.
all.
So I liked it. And actually, Joe had read further ahead than I had while I was kind of checking in with her. And she was telling me where they had read to, and I was always way behind. But I would just gush about where I was at in the story, and we would talk about it. And I ended up hearing Heidi and Kim talk about it when they were wrapping the book up, and hearing about their feelings about the book, which didn't
We're not
didn't
positive.
impact. Well, they didn't love it, which is fine.
Kim
And
bailed, right? Kim
Kim
bailed,
bailed.
I'm pretty sure.
Heidi finished, but I think one of the things that they had talked about was not really enjoying the aspect of the writing about music, which I thought was interesting, because I mean, obviously, we all have things we do and don't like in our literature or in the books we read. But that I thought was actually beautiful. And actually, when Thien was writing about the music, I thought she did a great job in terms of capturing rhythm, and also different types of intonation in the music, when it's sped up, when it's slow, when you hear a bit more of vibrato, and different kinds of volumes, and what it means to have different people or different musicians playing at the same time, and how that kind of juxtaposed with different parts of their lives, or what was going on with their lives, especially with the relationship among Kai, oh gosh, here we go, Kai Sparrow and Juhei. No, was it Julie? And I really thought that was interesting, because I do like, I mean, I love music and I'll listen to pretty much anything. So it was nice. And when I would see some of the pieces of music, I would check them out on YouTube and just listen to them. So I kind of understood what was going on. It was really nice. But I liked the kind of story within a story. I liked the long family saga. I like that it's obviously a fictionalized story, but that it's set against the quite tumultuous period of Chinese history when Mao Zedong comes into power. So the 1940s up until like the 1990s during the protests. And I know that if you've read a lot of that fiction, maybe you don't enjoy that either, but I don't tend to read a lot of fiction that's set in China. I've read a lot of Chinese Canadian literature that is set once first, second, and third generations of Chinese Canadians have settled. So more like Weisun Choi kind of writing, where not much is taking place in China, but more is taking place in Canada. So this was a nice treat for me, and nice reprieve.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
You're on that elite list of about you and Joe, I think, are the only people I can think of, because Joe ended up really loving it, right?
Yeah, she
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. Yeah. And I loved Kai and Sparrow's relationship. I don't know. I thought that some of the relationships that I read throughout all of these books were just really special. Well,
And
really well captured.
what was the old drama, Big Mama Knife or something?
Big Mother Knife. Yeah, she's great.
I loved her so much, and she brought so much humor into it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was it too. I think like Thien did a great job of capturing the humor that occurs during such dark times, you know what I mean? And just the kind of, the ways in which you have to find something to kind of laugh about or find joy in during such tough times, So I thought that was really, really interesting. And interesting to think about China's history during that time and thinking about what's going on there now. Like it's really it seems kind of timeless in that sense. So
I'm sure I said this in our first conversation as you were embarking on this project, that when I heard about it, I thought, oh, I'm not that interested in China. I'm not that interested in classical music. I don't think I really want to read this. And then it just grabbed me by the heart and didn't let go. It still hasn't let go. So
yeah, I think those close friendships and those almost relationships really highlight just how those really traumatic events in Chinese history affected just everyday Joes like you and me, and how that really disrupted their lives, whether that was an academic life or a professional life, a relationship, a familial relationship. I think she really captured that. So I mean, kudos to her for that. That was my favorite bit.
well, I didn't think it was going to be possible, but it has actually happened.
Yes.
I like you even better now.
There you go. Well, I mean, I didn't love happening, so I mean, we could still call it,
Well, no happening schmappening. No problem. That's awesome. And I'm already starting to peek at your Goodreads, because I threatened you before, and I'm going to honor this in 2024. I'm going to turn the tables on you and read 6 of your favorites.
There you go.
It was a really great project. I'm honored that you took it on. I'm delighted with the results, and happy reading.
Thank you. You too.